Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of Roadie Storytime, where I just sit here and tell you stories about my personal experiences of being on tour. Today, we are going to be doing one that a lot of people were asking about after I've mentioned it in a couple ones. We're going to be talking about how I got a random phone call one day that that landed me on a tour with Nickelback. As always, we're filming this live on Twitch because I think it's fun to just tell stories with people, you know, not around me, but at least in chat. So hi, chat. If you're on YouTube watching later, you can go to twitch.tv/TankTheTech and join us while we do these live. This one's wild because it's one of those moments in the music industry where it really kind of changed and shaped my whole career to where I'm at now. And even looking back on this before I even tell the story, I'm just like, dang, it's crazy. And a big part of this story, and it's really a point that I want to drive home for this whole story, is in the music industry, I feel as though you hear that constant saying, it's all about who you know. And I feel a more appropriate saying is, it's all about who knows you, because that is kind of what landed me on this tour. But before we get to the Nickelback part of this tour, we actually have to start this story years earlier. I could be wrong, but I believe it was around 2010-ish. At the time, I was still working for Red. Who we've talked about stories with before. When I was working for Red at the time, I was doing merchandise and bass teching and drum teching on this specific tour. And the tour package that we were on was Breaking Benjamin headlining, Chevelle, Red, and I believe 1,000 Foot Crutch. And there is a connection there too now. Red's former guitar player and like kind of main songwriter, Jason Rao, he was always involved with the Breaking Benjamin camp with like songwriting and stuff like that. And now in 2025, he's actually a guitar player for Breaking Benjamin and writes a lot of the music and tours with them and has been for a very long time. So they got onto that tour because they already had a relationship with Breaking Benjamin. Well, doing merchandise on that tour, we didn't sell a lot, because with merchandise, when you're working for a band, there are things called venue sells and artist sells. If it's an artist sell, it means that the band's merchandise manager is setting up all the merchandise and they're selling all night to the fans and stuff like that. But at larger venues, it's a venue sell where you basically just count in your merchandise and then the venue staff sets everything up and sells with you. At the end of the night, you count everything out, get paid, stuff like that. So on this specific tour, since it was venue sells most of the time, I got to, hang out with the other merch guys for the other bands a ton and stuff like that, and kind of hit it off with Breaking Benjamin's merch guy. Awesome dude. Like one of my favorite people I've ever toured with, one of the best merch people I've ever toured with. And we got to know each other on this tour pretty well. And we kind of kept in touch after the tour ended here and there, like just social media, like, hey, what's going on? Stuff like that. Fast forward a few years to about 2012 at this point. I had just got to the point where I had finished a tour and I got to it's inevitable for every roadie. When you don't have something lined up and you're about to finish a tour, you kind of get this panic that sets in. Because if you're not working for a band full time, when a tour is finishing, you have to find another tour to work, to get paid. That's actually, I think, one of the most stressful parts about this industry is that if you're a freelancer, you kind of have to just keep filling your own schedule. And if you're off, like you have no money coming in. So I finished a tour doing merchandise for a band and I got home. I was living in Nashville. At the time, I was living with another one of my buddies that was also a roadie. Kind of freaking out at home. I was like, dude, I don't know what I'm going to do. I haven't talked to anybody else about touring. And at the time, I had been kind of stuck in like the Christian music world for a while, like Christian metal and Christian rock bands and stuff like that. Nobody was really touring at the time. And my days just turned into sitting at home, eating ramen noodles and toast because didn't have any money coming in and didn't want to waste money. I was just broke and playing Call of Duty pretty much all day. I was single, whatever, just sit at home, play video games and eat my ramen. And one day I was, sitting with my roommate and just stressing about like, dude, he was getting ready to go out on a tour. I didn't have one and I'm kind of stressing out and my phone rings And it ended up being that old merchandise manager for Breaking Benjamin. Now, I hadn't talked to him in quite a while at that point. So I was like, oh, why would he be calling me right now? That's really weird. So I answer my phone and he's just a straight to the point kind of guy. And he goes, hey man, what are you doing right now? It's like, just sitting at home playing Call of Duty. He goes, no, I mean like tour wise, what do you have going on right now? I was like, nothing. And he goes, can you come out on the road in like the next like 3 days? And I was like, I could, yeah. And he's like, okay, because situation I'm in right now, I'm on a tour where I'm handling, like I'm the lead merchandise manager on a tour. And my assistant is getting, it's like his wedding anniversary, I believe, or something. So he's going to take like a few weeks off and I need somebody to replace them to be my assistant and just inventory on the truck, counting stuff in, stuff like that, you know. And like, I remembered you from the Breaking Benjamin tour we did. And I wanted to know if you'd come out here. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, dude. And the funny thing is I didn't ask for details. Looking back on it now, I was like, it's kind of funny that I was just like, yes, I needed work that bad. And that happens to a lot of roadies in the industry. You're just like, yeah, sure, cool. And he's like, okay, cool. It's an arena tour and it's through a company. I'm working for a merchandise company right now. So I'll give your info to the office. The office is going to call you, set everything up, and then I'll just see you whenever you get out here. I hang up and my roommate's like, dude, did you just get a gig? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, what gig? And I was like, I don't know. Like, no idea. But he said it's an arena tour and it's through a company. So maybe that'll be like an in with a company. I think like an hour later, I got an email from the office that was like, hey, do you have time for a phone call? So they called me and they're like, yeah, so, you know, this is what we expect of you. And this is like a weekly paid position. Like, here's what we're going to pay you. And the crazy thing too, is the first time in my career where I'd ever gotten offered a job where it wasn't just a 1099 freelance job. For anybody that's not American, 1099 is our tax form for when you're an independent contractor, when you're a freelancer, meaning most roadie jobs, you're a freelancer and you get paid in full and then you get a 1099 at the end of the year and then you pay taxes on that. Well, this was a full-time job. This was like taxes are taken out, all that stuff. And this is the first time in the industry I'd ever gotten offered that. So like, I was like flipping out. I was like, wow, I think I was like 24 at the time and super excited. So they were like, you're in Nashville. We assume that your home airport is BNA. And I was like, yeah. And they're like, cool, we're going to book your flights. We'll send you the ticket information. And then finally I was like, they didn't tell me what tour this was. I was like, oh really? Yeah, it's you're gonna do a few weeks on the Nickelback tour. And I was just like, what? Like really in that moment, I was like 24-year-old kid that had only toured with like Christian rock bands and stuff. I was like, Nickelback? Look at this photograph, Nickelback, that Nickelback. They were just like, yeah, you're just going to go out there, be the assistant merch manager for like a couple weeks of shows and yeah, that's it. And so I was like, okay. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. After that, I called quite a few of my friends because, nowadays I wouldn't because I'm older. I'm more professional. It's like, whatever. I could get a phone call from Metallica's camp right now, today in 2025. Be like, hey, you're going to come tour with Metallica. And I'd probably just walk downstairs and tell my wife like, hey, I took a tour with Metallica. Like I probably wouldn't freak out about it anymore because I've been in the industry long enough now that it's a job and I'm just like, okay. But back then, I'm not going to lie. I called quite a few friends and was like, bro, I'm going on tour with fucking Nickelback. Like, and it was kind of a joke, but kind of also like, holy shit, like that's a huge tour. And the tour that it was at the time was, it was in 2012. It was the Here and Now tour when that album came out. A great album, dude. Like it was really good. And that tour lineup was Nickelback, Bush, Seether, and Theory of a Dead Man? Or My Darkest Days? I think it was My Darkest Days. Something butt rock, stripper rock. I don't say that condescendingly. I mean, I think one of those bands literally has a song called like Porn Star Dancing or something that's about strippers. So like it checks out. But yeah, so it was, it was a big arena tour. So I fly out and you got to keep in mind, again, I've said this already, but I'm flying out for this tour and I'm a 24-year-old kid that had only ever worked on Christian rock tours and been in like local bands and stuff like that. And so, yeah, you got to imagine I'm walking through the Nashville airport. I've got my roadie resume on my hip, which if anybody doesn't know what a roadie resume is, that's when you take like every tour pass you've ever had and put it on a carabiner and rubber band it. So like everybody knows you're cool. That guy's got a bunch of tour passes on. He's a roadie. We don't do that anymore. But back when you're younger, yeah, that's a thing. And that's a thing for the rest of this story too, for further on in this story. So yeah, I got my Pelican case. I got my roadie resume on my hip, making sure everybody sees I got tour laminates so they know like he's cool. I was such an idiot back then, dude. It's like back when we were in local bands and we used to walk into Hot Topic at the mall. When we're home, we're not even on tour. We're just home and we have all of our tour laminates on our hip because we needed everybody to know we were cool. So I get on the plane, I head out. I can't remember where the first show was, if I'm being honest. Might have been like Washington, D.C. I think it was Washington, D.C. actually, where the Capitals play. I get in for the first show of tour. It was midday actually. So I think I arrived at the arena around like 2 or 3 p.m. So the lead merchandiser on the tour had already worked. He had already counted in merchandise for that show. And so when I get there, I text him and just like, hey, I'm here. And he's like, hey, don't worry about going to the bus yet. I'll take you there later. Like just come up to the concourse level. We're actually the office for the merchandise for the days in like the team store, like the Capitals team store. So I go in there and I kid you not, dude, the first thing dude says to me, like the lead merchandise manager that got me hired for this gig, I walk through the door. He's like, hey, what's up, man? Gives me a hug, blah, blah, blah. Looks down, sees all the laminates on my hip and goes, bro, you got to get rid of those right now. You're going to get made fun of relentlessly on this tour for doing that. You don't do that. He's like, welcome to the big leagues. Like literally like, he's like, no. He's like, dude, you will get made fun of relentlessly by everyone on this tour for doing that. And I was just like, oh, okay. Like, so I just took him off. Sneaked him into my bag. So he, you know, we get our introduction. First time we'd actually seen each other in like a few years. And he takes me down to the production office, introduces me to Nickelback's tour manager, production assistant, everybody that's down there. I think their head of security was in there in the time. Like it was a big tour, dude. It was the biggest tour I'd ever been on in that point in my career. I was astounded by the amount of people that were on that tour. Security, tour manager, assistant tour manager, production assistant. They had a chef on the road. Like it blew my mind at the time. Now with a lot of these tours that size, that's all normal, like completely. But so the tour manager gives me my tour pass, welcomes me to the tour, tells me what bus I'm going to be on. And when he gives me the tour pass, I take out my big giant thing of laminates and I put it on the top and rubber band it and put it back on. They all look at me after he had just told me like, don't do that. I put the Nickelback tour laminate on the top of the stack that was like this thick and I put it back on my belt loop. Everybody's just looking at me. And the lead merchandise manager is just like, really, dude? After I just told you that? He's like, no, get rid of all of those and just put that one on there. That's the only one that you need. And in my mind, I was like, but how's everybody going to know that I did all these other tours and I'm experienced and blah, blah, blah. And I really realized like during that day, every other tour I had ever done at that point did not matter. Did not matter at all. Even though I did arena tours in the past, I didn't know anything about touring at that level. Even though I had done arenas before, even though I'd been in that arena before, I realized like this is a whole different animal, dude. You know, one of the things that I've realized now as that I'm older is nobody really cares what tours you've done before. It just matters about the tour that you're on now and if you're doing your job right. Sure, it might come up in conversation while you're getting to know people on the road. Like, oh, I've done this tour, you know, before. Again, cool. But nobody really cares. They just care about what you're doing at that moment in time and if you're doing your job well. That's really it. I remember after that and like walking around backstage afterwards and he's showing me around and, you know, this is kind of how we set up backstage. Like here's the band dressing rooms, the crew dressing rooms, the drummer has his own practice room. Here's the after party room that's locked all day and opens after the show. And I'm like, after party room? What? You don't have those on Christian tours. Like it was wild, dude. And walking into catering, like proper catering for the first time in my career, I was just like, whoa, unreal, dude. And at that point in time, I started kind of getting overwhelmed. It was like, wow, dude, what did I get into here? Sink or swim right now. It's like walking around backstage where everybody's just moving around fast, doing their jobs, working, like people are yelling at each other, like, which is, you know, it's just the lovingly way to communicate on the road, you know, not like yelling like mad, just like yelling direction and stuff like that. And yeah, I just remember that whole first day, I was just so overwhelmed, like, oh my God, like this is a real tour. This is it. This is what I've wanted to do for years. So I got to get it together. And I remember one of the wildest things I learned about merchandise, that first show was bootleg. You don't really, I never seen that to that point in my career. At one point, the lead merchandise manager, like after doors had opened, was like, hey, we need to go downstairs and check with our off-duty cops about bootleg. And I was like, what? Yeah, he's like, our merch company, we hire off-duty officers or off-duty officers to enforce like bootleg security. And I was like, what is bootleg? He's like, how do you not know any of this? I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this before and are familiar with it. At a lot of big shows, there are people that will make bootleg, aka like fake knockoff t-shirts of the tour, and they go out into the parking lots and stuff and they sell it. That's why I see a lot of people when I talk about merchandise are like, yeah, I'm not going to pay $40 for a t-shirt inside when there's a guy outside selling it for $10. Hey, that's, you know, fair point. But just know that guy outside selling it in the parking lot for $10, like that's a knockoff t-shirt. It's fake. And none of that money that you've just paid that person is going to the actual band. There are people who make careers off of bootlegging merchandise, which I learned on this tour. There was a crew that followed the entire East Coast leg of this tour that was bootlegging at every show. We actually got to know them. It actually became kind of a funny thing. We all knew each other. We'd walk outside and we'd see a guy like on the sidewalk outside the venue and be like, hey man, you can't do that here. And he's like, all right, you got me. I'll go across the street off the venue property. And the thing about bootleg is you can't really do anything about it as a merchandise manager. As long as they're not selling the bootleg merchandise on the property of the venue you're performing at, there's really nothing you can do unless you have like a court order, like an injunction, which we did. A lot of larger merch companies will actually get off-duty cops to patrol outside venues, and they have a court injunction that they will serve to these bootleggers. But a lot of the times, all we're trying to do is make sure that they're not on venue property. We're like, dude, go across the street. Whatever. And it became kind of a funny cat and mouse, like a Tom and Jerry. It's like, we got along with the bootlegging guys fine, but we always had to make sure like, hey, you go over there. And with bootleg too, one of the things I learned, like there are some merchandise managers out there that will like to directly confront bootleggers. And we've always been told by merch companies, like, don't do that, because the reality in that situation is that you are directly impeding the process of somebody trying to make a living, trying to make money. It's like I said, there are bootleg companies that they print all of this merch for the tour and they follow the tour selling it. They'll make thousands of dollars outside every night. And by you going over there and trying to take their stuff and stop them, you're taking money out of their pocket. People don't take kindly to that. I've known merchandise managers that have been beaten to shit for trying to stop bootleggers. So I don't do that. If I have an issue, I send the off-duty cops out there. I do not confront bootleggers at all. Like, yeah, I know a story of a guy who thought he would take it upon himself once to stop bootleggers, and he chased a guy. He chased a guy around a venue, and he followed the guy for a while. The guy turned into an alley where a van was parked there, and all of his other bootleg buddies were there, and they beat his ass. So yeah, it's not worth it, dude. It's not worth trying to stop bootleggers if you're doing merchandise at a show at all. Bobaruski in chat said, do some bootlegs look better than the originals? I've never seen it. Usually the t-shirts that bootleggers are printing on and selling to people have manufacturer defects, and they're buying them at a very cheap price in bulk. So if you ever get a bootleg t-shirt, you'll often notice that the tag on the t-shirt has been cut, like snipped with a pair of scissors. That means that the manufacturer found a defect when it was being made, and they're not selling it as a full price item, so they get rid of it. So they sell them at a discount and stuff like that. So most bootleggers are printing on stuff that's had a manufacturer defect, and also their printing quality is usually not as good. But they usually They usually will somehow find like the official tour pictures, and they may not, at first glance, they may not look different from the actual tour shirt that's being sold. The print quality is going to be lower and stuff like that, but yeah, there's a lot of people that will buy it outside and not know the difference. The funny thing is usually the bootleg that the off-duty officers will confiscate, they'll bring to the tour management office, and then basically let the crew just take whatever they want. If they want like a bootleg shirt, I have so many bootleg shirts from other tours just because I've grabbed one and I've been like, yeah, this is kind of funny. I remember, this is a whole nother story. I'll just interject real quick. I remember when I was working for Dustin Lynch and we did a show with Garth Brooks once. We were doing a show at Bridgestone Arena, and Garth, who's one of the nicest people I've ever met on tour, we'll probably tell that story someday, but Garth told our whole crew, he's like, hey, if you guys want, they confiscated a lot of bootleg and it's in the annex over there if you want to go check it out. I've never seen more in my life. We walked into the little annex at Bridgestone Arena in Nashville. There had to have been like 60 gigantic like black garbage bags full of confiscated bootleg from that one show. And they're like, yeah, take whatever you want. Garth Brooks tour shirts, Trisha Yearwood shirts, like it was crazy. So yeah, they usually confiscate all the bootlegs and then they let the tour take what they want, and then whatever's left over, they honestly might just take to a Goodwill, or I've seen that happen where they just drop it at a Goodwill or something. So you might find like bootleg concert shirts at like Goodwill and shit too. But yeah, at that point, like by the end of that night, I watched the show that night in Washington, and I was like, dude, this is why I will always defend Nickelback. I know people like to hate on Nickelback because it's like funny, whatever, but you talk about some talented musicians, man. Like you listen to their studio albums and you're like, all right, they sound good. They write catchy songs and stuff. And live, dude, every person in that band is just an impeccable musician. Watching them rip solos, and their drummer, Daniel Adair, in my opinion, is one of the best rock drummers I've ever seen in my life, dude. He would do like a 4 or 5 minute drum solo every night coming out of a song. And like the craziest thing about that guy is like he had a drum room backstage where they set up like a replica of his show kit where he would practice for like an hour and a half every single day and then go on stage and play over a 2-hour show every night. Dude just lives and breathes drums. Like such a nice guy too, like unreal nice guy. So we finished that first show, and if I remember correctly, our bus that I was on, it was me, the lead merchandise manager, and then it was the security and pyro crew. And their head of security was this guy that was like probably like 6'4". I don't know if he was an older military guy or cop, but like very intimidating, but very nice. He was very, very cool even on my first day. But I was very intimidating, like being on that bus with all these people that were seasoned veterans, like pros. And I was kind of quiet and to myself, and I never really talked to anybody. And as the next few days and shows went on, I started getting out there and talking to more people, and realized that some of the people on the crews and the other bands I had actually toured with before and knew, like some of the Seether crew I knew. And I actually knew the guys in Seether at that point too, because we had done shows with Red for them. So on days off, I was actually hanging out with Seether and their crew more than anybody in the Nickelback camp. We'd go out and get food, go to bars and stuff like that. But people would think that the Nickelback tour was like mega rock star, but it wasn't. Like on days off, like the band members would go out and hang with the crew and go to restaurants. It would be normal that you'd see like their drummer or their bass player like out just at a bar with the crew on days off and stuff. I will say, I know everybody's waiting. Everybody, because we're talking about Nickelback, wants Chad Kroeger stories. I'll tell you right now, I don't have any Chad Kroeger stories. I really don't, because he was the one that was, kind of to himself, did his own thing, not in like an ego way, but like, if I remember right, I think at the time is when he was like dating Avril Lavigne or something. And I think, he was kind of just behind the scenes, quiet, hanging to himself, stuff like that. But the other band members would regularly go out and hang out and stuff. And it was just very cool vibe all around. Like it was really cool. So, I did a couple weeks of these shows, or a few weeks of these shows. And, as it was wrapping up, I had that, Canadians, exactly. They're Canadians, dude. They're just good people. Not to say there's no asshole Canadians out there, because I've met asshole Canadians, but like by and far, Canadians are just fucking really chill, cool people. But as that tour was wrapping up, it started setting in that, oh God, I'm going to have to go home again and find more work, as we talked about in the beginning of this. But what I didn't realize or count on happening was that me going out as an assistant merchandise manager on this tour was basically a trial run for this company. They didn't tell me that they wanted to hire somebody for other tours. My friend that got me on this gig basically, I guess, had told this company like, hey, this is a guy that if he does good, we can get him on other tours that we need. So 2 days before the tour ended, the head at the office from this merch company called me and was like, hey, so we were told you did a really good job and blah, blah, blah. So do you want to go home for some time off, or do you want to go on to another tour? And at the time I was single, hadn't met my now wife yet. I wasn't dating anybody at the time. I was like, yeah, just put me on something else, whatever. I'll go wherever. And they were like, okay, cool. So once this tour finishes, we're going to book your flight. I think the final show that I did with Nickelback was in like Pittsburgh maybe or something like that. And they're like, we're going to fly you out to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you are going to be the assistant merchandise manager for the rest of the duration of the current Van Halen tour. And again, that was another moment for me where I was just like, Van Halen? She's like, yeah, is that a problem? No. And that tour ended up being like, I think it had lasted for like another 2 or 2.5 months or something like that. So yeah, I finished up the Nickelback run and got on a plane immediately, like went to my hotel after the final show, got a quick few hours of sleep, went to the airport, flew straight to Tulsa, Oklahoma to start the tour that basically taught me the most and shaped me and really kicked my ass, because the first month of that tour was brutal. I joined the Van Halen tour with that cocky 24-year-old kid. I've done arena tours. I just did a quick run with Nickelback. I know what I'm doing. Fuck, dude, I had no idea what I was doing. And that whole tour, hated my guts for like the first month of it, but it ended all right. I still to this day have lifelong friends that I made on that tour that I still talk to all the time. But that is definitely the tour that shaped me and taught me the most and kicked my ass into shape about being a professional and being a roadie in this industry. And that's a story for another time, because we've been telling this one for a while and this is strictly about the Nickelback stuff. But I just want to wrap that one up by saying, I really, if anybody out there ever wants to be a roadie, I really, really stress, like, let your work do the talking for yourself, because again, it's all about who knows you, and you never know when somebody is going to remember you from another tour and put your name out there or offer you a gig because they've remembered your work ethic from before. So I'm going to wrap this one up there. To everybody that was on Twitch, thank you for being here. I once again appreciate it. Again, if you're watching on YouTube later, you can go to twitch.tv/TankTheTech. I'm also on a bunch of social media. At TankTheTech is my handle on everything. And when I'm on tour, I post pictures and stuff like that. I've also got tour vlogs and a playlist of other roadie stories if you guys want to check that stuff out. But I'm going to get going. So until next time, wherever you are in the world, be safe, be kind to each other. I love you all, and I will see you very soon.